This is my Centurion mini computer. It is so massive that I actually had to use the 24mm lens on the camera instead of the really nice 50mm lens, which gives this kind of beautiful, crystal clear depth of field. But it was so big that I couldn't get the camera far enough away to get it all to fit in the frame on that 50mm lens. Kind of need something in between the two. But the machine here is kind of split up into three different sections. We have our primary section in the middle. This actually contains the computer itself, which is down here underneath this panel on the bottom. This has the CPU 6 card. This is an AM2901 based CPU that implements a microcoded instruction set that's wholly unique to the Centurion. Nothing else on the planet uses that. Has a disk 1, disk 2 disk controller card. This is only for controlling Hawk or Falcon drives, and I just so happen to have a Hawk drive right here in the center. We have a multiplexer card that has 4 ports on it. That's for communicating with data terminals like this ADS Regent 100 that's sitting on top here. We have 2 128K memory cards for a total of 256K of memory. We have a Finch floppy controller card that is controlling a Finch drive and a floppy drive, which we have right here. We have this awesome floppy drive that I got from Curious Mark, and we have an 8-inch hard drive in there called the Finch that is 32 megabytes. And finally, we have a Centronics printer card. Now, this printer card could talk to any Centronics printer, but the printer that Centurion sold with the system was this big boy over here. This is a ODEC or Data 100 printer. It's 132 columns and it does 125 lines per minute. And all of this works. It all functions. This thing was a total barn find. It was sold as scrap metal, but over the last 3 years, I can't believe we've gotten this far. And it is so very nearly complete. We have 2 final issues that we need to cover with this primary system. I have one more multiplexer card that I want to put in there, but that multiplexer card is broken. So we're gonna have to dive into it and find out why it's not functioning. And this panel here doesn't match color-wise and it has a big old scratch on it. So we're gonna have to make a new panel for that and paint it the correct color. But what I want to start focusing on today is actually this third cabinet over here. There are 3 interesting items going on in this cabinet. There's the EDS PC on top, and that also fully works. We've had it powered up into DOS and plugged into this machine, functioning as a remote terminal. But the 2 drives underneath it don't work. This one is a CDC Phoenix drive, and that one terrifies me. So instead, we're gonna focus on the CDC Hawk drive below it. Now, the Disk 1, Disk 2 controller card in this machine can support up to 4 Hawks. And so we should be able to get that drive plugged into the primary computer and have it set up as a second Hawk drive. But that drive has some interesting problems, as well as some design differences that are going to present hurdles that we may not be able to overcome, actually. So there's a lot of interesting things that we need to figure out about that drive. So let's just hop into it. For those that aren't familiar, the CDC Hawk drive is a 135-pound hard drive that gives you a whopping 10 megabytes of storage. You get 5 megabytes on a fixed platter and 5 megabytes on a removable platter. But because this platter is actually removable, the drive actually seems a little larger than 10 megabytes because you can swap it out 5 megabytes at a time and really kind of expand out your total data storage. It's a really interesting drive, and in the early 1970s, this was an insane amount of storage, and it was extremely fast with proper random access. It kind of changed the entire mini computer landscape. And as such, I've taken a strong liking to these drives. I've actually fully restored the one that is in the primary machine, and it works at 100%. I've fixed another one that ended up being a fixed only system because I didn't have enough good heads to get the removable platter working, so we kind of faked the system out so that it would work as a 5 megabyte fixed drive only. There is a third drive over there that I have gotten almost completely working, but again, we have a bad head on the lower head for the removable pack. So the removable pack is read only, but the fixed is proper read write. And this would be the fourth one of these drives that I will have tried to bring up. And this one has a pretty interesting story because it came from Dave McGuire over at the Large Scale Systems Museum up in Pittsburgh. And if you haven't heard of the LSSM in Pittsburgh, go check it out. Dave McGuire is just an awesome person in general, and I always have a blast hanging out with him whenever I get the chance. But also he's got an unbelievably cool collection of large scale systems. And so one time while I was up there just hanging out, having a blast, I was wandering around some of the stuff he has in storage, and I stumbled across this drive. It didn't have the blue front panel on it. It didn't have a front panel on it at all, actually, at the time. And I absolutely flipped out because it was a Hawk drive, and I love these things. And Dave said, tell you what, why don't we just go ahead and throw it in your truck and you can see if you can get it going. And so here it is. And actually, we got pretty close to getting this drive going because I took it with me to VCF Southwest a couple of months ago, and we tried to get it going live in front of about 20 or 30 people that were there watching and helping. And it was just a ton of fun. And we did actually get it spun up. We got the heads loaded, flying over the platters, and we were able to take control of the drive and get it to seek around. But we ran into an interesting handful of problems before we ran out of time. The first biggest problem is that this drive, even though it looks identical, is actually a little different than the rest of the drives that I have and the drives that Centurion used, because this drive uses something called a straddle erase head, and all of the Centurion drives use a pre-erase head. And this, I think, is going to be a hurdle that we cannot overcome, but we're gonna try our best. But before we dive into that, while I was at VCF Southwest, the servo control board on the Mini Centurion's Hawk drive died. It just completely gave up the ghost, stopped controlling the voice coil to send the heads out. So I stole the one off of this drive, put it on that drive, and we made it through the rest of the weekend. But that one is starting to fail as well. It has to warm up before it properly controls the voice coil. So now I'm in an interesting position where I've got 3 of these drives, I've got 4 voice coil control boards, and only one of them works at 100%. So I've got one that is mostly working but failing, and 2 that have failed completely. One of them will absolutely not drive the servo at all, and the other one drives it but can't hold position. So we've got some weird analog faults going on there. So what I want to do today is go through, clean this up, make sure that it's ready to load the heads again, fire it up, load the heads, and see how the servo control boards are failing, and maybe we can start to troubleshoot and figure those out. Let's go ahead and get this thing apart so we can see what we're working with. And the first step is, of course, to get this front panel off. Then let's manually unlock the disc pack clamps. Then we'll pull the dust cover off. And finally, we'll pull out the removable disc pack itself by lifting the lever to disengage it from the magnet. With the pack out of the way, we now have access to the 3 screws that hold the casing in place. Then we'll carefully pull it straight up, exposing the fixed platter underneath. Now, this platter doesn't have any data on it yet, so I want to get it out just to make sure that everything is looking good. And it's just held in place with 6 screws holding the retaining ring. And with those removed, I can pull the retaining ring off and then carefully lift the platter out. And looking at the bottom side, oh, that's a head crash, all right. It didn't go through the oxide, but still, I don't think we should fly this platter again. Getting back to the drive, let's do a little more disassembly by pulling the capacitor bank off. Then I'll carefully slide the heads out, and I'm going to use the fat on my fingertips to cushion the heads so they don't slap into each other as we unload them off of the roll pins. Then, after removing the retaining clips, we can pull all 4 heads right out. All right, I'm learning all sorts of interesting things here. The fixed platter lower head, that's this one right here, shows very obvious signs of a crash. And That's clear because if we look at the platter itself, it also has very obvious signs of a crash. We'll never use this platter again because it could probably just cause another crash. But if we look at the upper side of this platter, there are no signs of a crash. And, well, it looks pristine, like nothing bad ever happened to it. However, if we look at the upper head for the fixed platter here, there are signs of a crash on it. So I think one of two things happened here. Either the head picked up some gunk on the platter and it marred up the head, but not so much that the head then lost stability and crashed into the platter, causing a cascading failure, which I think is highly unlikely. Or the head had a crash on it already, because I put this platter in, but I did not pull the heads out of it when I was at VCF Southwest. When I first got this drive from Dave McGuire up at the LSSM, I took a look at the platter that was in it, and it had some gunk spilled onto it, that same gunk that has solidified on the bottom of the drive here. So I just threw the platter away, but that platter showed no evidence of head crashes. So I wrongfully assumed that the heads were going to be clean. So when I was at VCF Southwest, I just cleaned the heads with some chamois swabs, slapped a new platter in it, slapped a removable platter in it, spun it up, and flew the heads. And I didn't hear any zinging or tinging or any sounds of a head crash, but also I'm deaf in one ear and dumb in the other. So it's entirely possible that a head crash did happen. Well, I mean, clearly a head crash happened, and I just didn't hear it. But what's interesting is if we look at the two heads for the removable pack, the upper and lower both show evidence of a crash. But as best as I could tell, looking at the removable pack that I pulled out of it, it doesn't seem like there was a crash on that pack. So I think what's going on here is all four heads had crashed on the drive before I ever got it, and I just didn't take it out and clean it properly like I should have. So we're going to rectify that. However, I do want to check the resistance of the coils on the lower head, because if I remember when we were at VCF Southwest, we were trying to do a format write operation, and the Hawk drive was throwing a fault code. Usually it only does that if there's a blown coil in the head. Now, granted, there's a pretty heavy crash on that lower head, so it could have been causing the fault code from something else, but we can confirm that pretty quickly by just doing a quick resistance check. If we find an open value on anywhere one of the pins, then we know that we have a problem. All right, check this out. I've measured the removable upper head, the removable lower head, the fixed upper head, and they all measure out fine. I've got the measurements written down right here. It's 2.5 ohms and 16 ohms. Essentially exactly what I was expecting for a straddle erase head, but the fixed lower head, the one that actually had the pretty nasty crash, check this out, this is crazy. All right, so if I go pin 1 to pin 3 here, open. All right, if we do pin 2 to 3 here, also open. Let's do pin 4 to pin 3 here, and it is also open. All three coils on this one are blown. I've had a lot of bad heads, but I've never had one that had all three coils totally blitzed. So it's not even worth trying to clean this head up because all the coils are bad. Even if we fly it, we can't do anything with it. But I happen to have a secret weapon in my pocket, and that is this thing right here. This is a new old stock head for the Hawk that I bought many, many moons ago and realized that I could not use it on any of my Hawk drives because this is a straddle erase head. Well, the stars have finally aligned. I can use this new old stock straddle erase head to replace this one that is bad and get all four heads hopefully working on this drive. Now, I've mentioned straddle erase and pre-erase a couple of times up to now, but what does that actually mean? And I actually have a straddle erase head right here and a pre-erase head right here. Now, both of these have bad coils, so don't worry about me picking them up and handling them. I'm not going to make them any worse than they actually are. But they look identical. As a matter of fact, physically, I could put either one of these in that drive, and if they were clean, they would totally fly and work just fine. But electrically, they're very different. And it turns out that CDC actually made 12 different heads for Hawk drives. And that's splitting them into upper and lower, which electrically they're the same upper and lower, but physically they're different because they have to be mounted in different places. So really there's only 6 different types of heads that we need to think about. So if we look at this little chart here, there's 100 track per inch and 200 track per inch. You've got PE and SE, and you've got 1500 RPM and 2400 RPM. Our drives are all 2400 RPM, so we really only need to think about the 200 TPI, PE or SE. PE being pre-erase, SE being straddle erase. Now, what this means is the erase head is located in a physically different location within the head, depending on which one you use. So pre-erase puts the erase head before the read-write head, but straddle erase puts the erase head around the read-write heads. And interestingly, it says write head does own erase. So these two heads are going to lay down bits and read them back off slightly differently. And that's where I think we're going to run into a problem whenever we plug this drive into this machine, because this machine was designed to work with pre-erase heads. So I do want to explore that a little further, even though I think that that's going to be a hurdle that we can't overcome ultimately. But we still need to get that far. I don't have any heads that are worthy of flying over the platter without risk of crashing again, except for that new old stock one. So I need to clean these up and then clean the drive up pretty extensively and then get it all back together. I want to give the drive itself a solid cleaning, which means I need to heft it out of the room, and even with most stuff removed, this thing is still phenomenally heavy. I would guess it's like 80 to 100 pounds like this. I should really start exercising more. At any rate, let's hit it with the air hose to get as much dust and dirt and grime off as possible. This is something I couldn't do at VCF Southwest, and maybe what ultimately contributed to the head crash. And speaking of those heads, let's go ahead and clean up the 3 that will be going back in. I need a nice flat surface, so I'll use a previously crashed platter as a work area. I just placed some green bar printer paper around it, soak it in 91% isopropyl alcohol, then slowly work the head across the surface. The weave of the green bar paper acts like a polishing compound that cleans the heads right up. After scrubbing for about an hour, and maybe even a little longer than that, the results speak for themselves. 3 heads that look nearly brand new. You can still see some scratches that couldn't be polished out, but these should fly with absolutely no problems whatsoever. Now comes the very, very fiddly task of trying to get the heads back in place. The heads have quite a lot of spring pressure pressing them towards the disc surface, so it's a bit of a nightmare to get everything lined up and then clamped down. Ultimately though, I got there, and then it was time to put down a new uncrashed platter. The platters are identical to deck RL platters, and there's still quite a few of those out there, but platters and heads are getting increasingly rare these days. Once in place though, I'll go through and cinch everything down nice and tight. Then we'll carefully drop the casing back in place. This is a bit of a pain because the wiring for the removable pack sector transducer is always right in the way. Once I've got it slotted down and tightened up, I want to make sure that the removable pack didn't suffer a similar fate as the fixed disc, especially considering how filthy the heads look. To get into the removable pack, I'll remove the dozen or so screws around the periphery, then peel the plastic away, revealing the disc inside. And heck yeah, that looks as clean as can be. This disc absolutely did not suffer a crash, despite the appearance of the heads. Let's get the pack back together, and then we'll drop it back into the drive, being sure to put the dust cover back in place. Finally, we'll drop in one of my spare servo control boards. I have no idea which one this is, but we'll find out once we power it on, hopefully. And speaking of which, let's start flipping switches. With the main power on, the fan spins up, and after checking that airflow seems good, let's push that start-stop button. And, oh, oof. Alright, the fault light illuminated immediately. And, yeah, I'm adult. I forgot to put the power relay back in. That'd do it. Let's try again here. And excellent, it's spinning up. Now the heads are unplugged and locked, so I'm just gonna let it sit here and spin without loading the heads so it can purge any dust or particles that may have found their way inside while we were working on it. All right, it's been sitting here spinning for about 30, 45 minutes. That should have purged any dust that would have gotten into the system by having it apart. I think we're ready to try and load the heads. I'm fairly certain I've got everything bolted down tight, ready to go. So we'll hit this button here. It'll spin to a stop. We'll plug the heads in and unlock them, and then spin it up again. The only thing that I don't know is that the servo control board that I put on there might be the one that is totally blasted and it won't actually load the heads, or it might be the one that works normally but can't hold position for very long. So if it's that one, it should load the heads like normal, but if it's the other one, it just may never actually move. So I don't know, only one way to find out, and let's plug it in and give it a shot. I'll go ahead and plug the heads back in. This little plug allows the voice coil to be powered up. Then I'll remove the cotter pin that locks the heads in place, and now it's free to move. We'll spin it up, wait for the requisite 60 seconds to pass for the boot up time, and yeah, nice. There we go. The head's loaded automatically. And I don't hear anything nasty, so let's try to take control of the drive with the Centurion. All right, I've got the heads loaded and the drive plugged into the Disc 1, Disc 2 controller card. I've got the diag card in there and we've booted up into the memory monitor here. And I think I can take control of this drive from here. So if I do an MF14803, this is a return to track 0. So if I hit that, yeah, we can see it seeks all the way out and comes all the way back. So that finds track 0. Apparently that servo control board is working correctly. Let's stress that a little more. Let's do MF141, and let's pick a place out in the middle of nowhere, 1000. This is our sector address, and what we want to do is seek to this. So we're going to do MF14802. And when I hit this, the voice coil should seek out. Yes. All right, it absolutely did. That's awesome. Let's go even further. Let's do MF1412000. And then MF14802. Yes, I can see it seeked even further out. That servo control board seems to be working. But for now, let's go ahead and go back to track 0 here. Excellent. Now let's go back out to 1000 and let's try to write something. So let's seek out to it, MF148 here, 02. That's seeked right on out to it. We want to turn the write bit mask on. That's going to be MF143, and we want to make that to 02. That's essentially a software write protect, so we should be able to write to the fixed platter now. So let's just do a sector format, MF14806, MF14805. That should have formatted it. Let's see if we can read it back. MF14800. MF144 is our status register, and we get 1070. Now the 70 means that write enable is on, we're on cylinder, the drive is ready, and it's in good shape. The 10 is not great. That means that we have a format error, and that's actually kind of what I was expecting to see. Well, this has been an strange episode. I have no idea what's going on. I initially set out to try and figure out why my servo control boards were bad, but clearly it's not that bad. I was able to take control of the drive and do RTZs and seek out to specific locations. So maybe we have a component on it that's marginal only when it gets very hot. So I might have to slide it into the cabinet and allow it to heat soak, or maybe I can test it with the hairdryer on it or something. But what I wanted to test is ultimately not at all what we ended up testing today. Instead, we ran into all sorts of problems with head crashes, but I think we've got that fixed. All 4 heads seem to be flying just fine, no weird sounds coming out of it, and the platters look pretty clean. And we have good coils on all 4 heads. So this is the only other Hawk drive I have that has 4 good working heads in it. Unfortunately, we can't use this Hawk drive with this Centurion because they are straddle erase heads and these are pre-erase heads. And as we saw, every time I tried to format a sector and then read our format back, we got a format error, which tells us that it's not seeing the bits that it's supposed to see. But the big question is, why? Why does the Centurion even care what kind of heads are in this? The only setting for the heads that you have on any of the control cards are on the read-write-erase card in the drive. And that is the very last step before you get to the heads themselves. So the drive only cares about getting an erase gate, getting a write gate, getting a sector address. It's just receiving instructions. And then it's just feeding data back into it or taking data and sending it to the write head. So why on earth does the Centurion not work with straddle erase, but does work with pre-erase? And well, we need to look at the construction of the heads to know for sure. And we can see that the erase head and the write head on a pre-erase head are separated. And the erase head actually cuts across the data first, and it cuts across a very wide swath of magnetic material, and then the write head sits behind it. Whereas on the straddle erase, the erase head and then the write head itself are kind of combined, creating a very wide erase pattern, and then the write head goes back and writes data down later. Now, what I thought was happening was the disk controller card would say, hey, erase this sector. The sector would erase, and then it would turn the erase gate off and it would turn the write gate on and say, write data to this sector. That makes perfect sense to me, and that would actually work perfectly with both heads. Makes absolutely zero difference what head you're using if you're doing it that way. But Centurion is not doing that. The problem with doing it that way is that you have to wait a full revolution for the sector to come back around before you can write data down. Centurion wanted to be a little quicker. So if we look at the schematic for the disk 1, disk 2 controller card, we can see write gate and erase gate coming off of pins 9 and 15 of the 50-pin connector that goes to the drive. If we follow those over, they come over here to the DS8835. This is a tri-state driver chip, and they're coming out of pins 1 and pins 4. We can see that pin 1 and pin 4 is bus A and bus B. So we need to find input A and input B, and that is on pins 2 and pin 5. And if we go back to the schematic for disk 1, disk 2 here, we can see pin 2 and pin 5 are tied together. So what Centurion is doing is they're turning on the erase gate and the write gate at the exact same time. So erasing a sector and writing new data into that sector is not two discrete operations, it is a single operation. But you can see that on a straddle erase head, that's actually impossible because there's nothing to erase the data. We're turning on erase gate and write gate at the same time. It's never going to write down the data that it's supposed to write down. There's never any erasing that's happening on. So it just can't be done. So these heads cannot be used with this disk controller card because that state machine on that controller card is set up specifically for pre-erase. The benefit is that it writes data much faster, but the downside is well, I'm running low on pre-erase heads. That's the downside. So we didn't have a fully functioning hawk drive at the end of this for use with the computer. I mean, we do have a fully functioning hawk drive. That's pretty awesome. That's a win in my book. But we're gonna have to fill this hole on this cabinet with something else. And this hawk drive will be destined for use in some other machine in the future. I have no idea what, but maybe we can figure that out whenever that time comes. So I want to thank you guys so much for hanging out with me on this kind of strange meandering journey we took through hawk drives. And well, I hope to see you in the next episode.